You know, I'm ashamed to admit that at one point in my life, I was classed as one of the most dangerous prisons in the British system. But how this started, beginning of my life, I had really carrot ginger hair. Well, I still got ginger hair. And I got picked on and bullied a lot of everybody. And I didn't realise at the time, but when I look back now, it had a massive I didn't fit in with people. I never felt loved. I always felt like the odd one out. And as I started to get older, this led to me getting in with the wrong crowd. And I started to burgle houses, became what the police call an opportunist thief or a career criminal. And this was my young life up until a teenager. But then what I didn't count on is mental health. I started to suffer with a lot of mental health and started to watch the wrong kind of movies and started to have a fascination in knives and guns and gangsters, as you say. And I started going down the route of wanting respect from people. This eventually led to me running up to a man, another local hard man in another area, and I ran up to him. He pulled out a hammer. I pulled out a 9-inch kitchen blade, and I stabbed him straight through his head. And I was on the run for attempted murder. And while I was on the run for this attempted murder, I ended up going to another local area where I used to sell drugs at the time. And I went into the local pub to get rid of some drugs. And what happened is another local handy lad had approached me and pulled me aside. And because my life was all about a reputation at the time, I remember thinking to myself, if I've been pulled up here, and if I don't respond to being pulled up, then it looks like I've backed down. And so I made a choice then that I was going to make an example of him. So in the pub, he said the wrong thing while I was thinking this. He said to me, "You want to mess about with the big boys, do you?" And this snapped something in my head. And I put my head into his face and I said, no. I said, "You're messing about with the big boys. Get outside, because I'm going to kill you." And he didn't believe me. I went outside and he didn't come out because everyone in the club had knew my reputation. They knew what I was going to do. And eventually he came out, and when he come out, I turned round and I stabbed him straight through his chest. And the police are saying that if he didn't move the way he moved, that he would have died. Basically, he would have went through his heart. And that was what led me to go into prison. But I went to prison with an anti-authority mentality. I hated prison officers, I hated the police, and I hated anything to do with any government. So while I was in there, I sort of waged war against the system, as you want to call it. I got involved in selling drugs in prison, and this eventually led to me going out my cell and stabbing 2 prison officers. And how this came about was basically the prison officers wouldn't let me go to the gym. And at the time I was 19 stone, I used to train constantly. I had a mentality that you had to be fit and ready for when a fight come, because I had a fear of losing in a fight. And so this is what I used to do, and the prison officers wouldn't let me go to the gym. And this, when the officer come to the door, I felt like he was taking the mick out of me. And so I basically told him I was going to kill him, and he didn't believe me. And so when I went out on association, and what association is in our prisons is where all the inmates come out of the cell, they gather together for a few hours, play pool, go on the phone, have visits, whatever is on. While I was on this association, I plotted to get the prison officer. I went out my cell with a broken coffee jar, a broken glass coffee jar, I had it wrapped in a towel. I went out on association, and an inmate was playing pool, and I went up to the inmate, and I told the inmate that he had to chuck the pool balls at the prison officers, and he did. When he chucked the pool balls at the prison officers ran towards him, and that's when I smashed the bottom of the coffee jar off the wall, and I ran up to the prison officer and I stabbed him 3 or 4 times. And another prison officer come, and I ended up stabbing him as well. This immediately makes you a dangerous prisoner in the system, and you'd have thought that would have been enough, but I ended up carrying on raging war in the segregation, and I ended up in the maximum security prisons, and they ended up on what they call CSC, and it's a close supervision circuit. And just to give you an understanding of what this is in a maximum security prison is designed for the most dangerous prisoners in our country. And it holds terrorists, mass murderers, and I was not allowed amongst them because I was classed as being too dangerous to be amongst them. And then I was isolated off from the segregation. It's almost like a prison within a prison. So how it all is it's no physical contact. So when your door gets open, there's 6 or 7 prison officers and riot shields. When they feed you through a hatch, so they'll put a box, connect it, unlock one side, put your food in, lock it, and then unlock the other side. And this was my life for years. And I still fought the system. Still, when my cell door opened, I would fight them and go on like that, basically. And that was my life through prison. Eventually, I calmed down a little bit. And when I calmed down a little bit, they said they were going to give me a chance. And they put me on a ferry and took me to the Isle of Wight. And when I was there, I went into prison and got involved in selling heroin in the prison. But it gets good now. But while I was in this prison, a prison inmate approached me and started trying to tell me about Jesus and God. And I just thought he was an absolute idiot and a crackpot. You know, I have to be truthful. And he kept coming. But I remember one thing I remember him saying to me is he came to me one day and he said this. He said, I've been in prison for years and years and I'm never getting out again. And he pointed at his chest and he said, but I'm free. And for the first time out of all the talks he ever did, I listened. And it wasn't because I understood what he was saying. It was because I didn't understand what he was saying. Because how can you be in prison for the rest of your life and be free? And I couldn't get it, and it puzzled me. But after this conversation, I would go to my cell and I would think about it, and eventually I got back involved in selling drugs, and I was involved in selling drugs, and I put a hit on a prison officer. After this talk had happened, but I was thinking, but I'd put a hit, 10 bags of heroin on the prison officer, and it was a set-up. And eventually I was took to the segregation unit. I then went back to the maximum security system. I was in there a few weeks, and a prison officer opened my door and he said, go to education. So I went to education department, and when I got to the other end, my name wasn't on the list. Now, just to explain this, in our prison system, how it works is they've got what you call movements. And so when movements come, they'll open your door and they'll tell you education, chaplaincy, visits, whatever's on, and you will go to that destination. When you get to the other end of that destination, if your name's not on the list, they'll send you back to the wing. And in a maximum security prison, they're a lot more strict on it. And when I got to the gate, the officer said, your name's not on the list. So I made a fuss. I said, I've walked all the way over here. And eventually the officer stepped back and he said, go to the chaplaincy. So I went to the chaplaincy and I ended up walking in on a course called the Alpha course. It's the basics of Christianity, and it's all over the world. And when I went on this course, I remember a circle of lads and this posh person talking on the video, and I remember sitting down and then thinking, oh no, it's a Christian thing, because I didn't believe in God. So I was trying to make an excuse to get out, waiting to get out. But while I was waiting, one of the ladies said, are you meant to be here? I gave her my name, and she said, oh, your name's not on the list. So I said, I'll go. But as I said that, one of the inmates said, you get free chocolate gatos and biscuits. So I basically said, miss, can you put my name down? And so she put my name down. You know, the point is I was only going for that. I was only going to this course to get me out of my cell, to get the bourbon biscuits and the chocolate gatos or whatever was on, and you got coffee. And while I was on this course, I would argue and debate, and because I didn't believe in it. But to my surprise, an officer come up to me. A prison chaplain came up to me, because they have a day what they call the Holy Spirit Day, and so they'll come and they'll pray for people, and people have experiences, but nothing happened to me, and so I was a bit gutted, really. And then the chaplaincy come up to me and he said, "I've never done this in all the years I've worked here, but God has just told me to tell you to come here this afternoon." And again, my motive, it was just to get out myself. And so I went back over, and when I went there, I found the pastor, and he got 2 chairs, and he put the chairs in front of each other, and he said a prayer. He said some verses out of the Bible about Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, and then he said some prayers, and he said, "Pray." With I've been doing this for 10 years, but I still cry now, because this was a moment my life totally changed. I found myself asking God to come into my life, because I hate who I'd become. And I had an experience, I felt an energy feeling in my stomach, and it started to raise up. And when this feeling got to my chest, the feeling shot up my body, and I uncontrollably sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And the first thing I said to the pastor was, "Don't you dare tell anyone I've been crying." But it was funny, because in the maximum security prisons, when movements are going on, they stand in groups, the prison officers, and if you're known to attack prison officers, they know exactly who you are. So I ran on the wing with a Bible in my hand. It's funny. So I've jumped in front of the officers on the wing, and I went, "It's real." They've jumped back. They thought something was going to happen. I was saying, "It's real." Eventually one of them said, "What's real?" I said, "Jesus Christ is real." And they all split up and walked off. And my life from then, I went from being one of the most dangerous prisoners in the country to then overnight I ended up a chaplaincy orderly, which is a privileged job. I ended up on enhanced, which is where you get privileges in the prison. Within a year and a half of that, I got out of prison, and I've been out now for 11 years, and I've never committed a crime. I've never committed a crime, and I never intend to ever again in my life. And some of the things what's happened since then is absolutely amazing. So now I go in the very prison where I stabbed the prison officers up. You would have thought would have been the last prison to have me. You would have thought they might have get me in one prison, tested it, but no, within a year or so being out, the governor of the prison gave permission to the head prison officer, who's friends with the officers I stabbed, to come to my house and have a cup of coffee, to ask if I would come to the prison and work alongside the prison. I managed to meet the prison officer who was stabbed. I managed to meet the prison officer who was stabbed, and I held my hand out to him, and I said, "Look, I'm very sorry for what I've done. Can you forgive me?" And he held his hand out and he said, "I forgive you." And that was an answer to prayer for me. And I now work for the very course, the very alpha course that changed my life by God, but he used the alpha course to change my life, and now employing me, and I now go in the prisons once a week doing an alpha course myself, which is absolutely amazing. And just to see how crazy it feels, is 3 of my actual co-Qs that on that alpha course who laughed at me when I got out of prison and said they would never ever do one, which is offered. I'm now a family man. I've got 5 beautiful children. I'm married with 5 beautiful children. And do you know what upsets me is if I had my kids before, I would have brought them up wrong. They would have been shoved with steroids, not as kids when they got a bit older. I'd have shoved them with steroids. I'd have twisted their minds that they have to be tough. And do you know what they get now? A father who loves and adores them, and a father who's going to bring them up right. and they're going to go to church. My oldest daughter was baptised, and they've got a chance in life what they wouldn't have gotten. And do you know, I just want to finish by saying this: a leopard can change its spots. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.